Welcome to the Affirming Minds podcast, where we equip like-minded mental health professionals with a therapeutic toolkit that helps add to a more engaging, fulfilled, and effective mental health practice. Each empowering episode can stand alone as a continuing education pod course or a very valuable professional or personal resource with insightful expert interviews, practical resources, industry news, and lots of inspiration. We help the modern therapist thrive at work. Now let's welcome your host, a dedicated therapist and passionate educator, Shaina Siber, LCSW.
Welcome to the Affirming Minds podcast. I'm your host, Shaina Siber. I'm so happy that you tuned in today. This show is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional treatment or clinical supervision. If you're in need of support, please reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area. Whole clinical examples shared are fully de-identified, composites, or vignettes. No real client information is ever disclosed. If you're interested in earning continuing education credits for this episode, head to affirmmentalhealth.com. Our membership gives you access to CEs for live virtual workshops, self-study webinars, and eligible podcast episodes right here on the Affirming Minds podcast. Today, we're diving into a topic that's often misunderstood, even within our own profession: dissociation and dissociative identity disorder, or DID. Dissociation is a universal human experience. It exists on a continuum, from everyday zoning out to trauma-related fragmentation of self. But when dissociation becomes persistent, disruptive, or confusing to the person experiencing it, it can be hard to recognize and even harder to treat, especially when it doesn't fit the examples we learned in graduate school or the extreme portrayals we've seen in media. Dissociative identity disorder is one of the most stigmatized and underdiagnosed conditions in our field. Many clients with DID or complex dissociation spend years being misdiagnosed, often with schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder, after working with multiple providers who never identified the underlying trauma and dissociation. This misdiagnosis can exist more in certain populations. Research shows that Black and Brown clients are significantly more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders, even when their symptoms align more closely with trauma or dissociation. One review of empirical studies found consistent diagnostic bias contributing to racial disparities in psychosis diagnoses. Psychiatrist Jonathan Metzl's research also highlights how schizophrenia became racialized in clinical narratives during the 20th century. Trans and non-binary clients often face another layer of misinterpretation. Identity fragmentation, dysphoria, or dissociation may be pathologized or dismissed when clinicians are not trained in gender development, trauma, or affirming care. Both research and practice guidelines stress that culturally humble, trauma-informed frameworks are essential when working with LGBTQ clients. Clients with chronic illness, disability, or neurodivergence also are at risk of having dissociative symptoms misunderstood, often through a behavioral lens rather than a trauma-informed one. Studies have shown that individuals navigating chronic conditions may experience dissociation that is dismissed or overlooked. So that's why we need frameworks that are not just trauma-informed, but also structurally aware, so we can see what might otherwise be missed or can offer care that affirms both identity and experience. Today's guest brings exactly that kind of nuanced, compassionate lens to this work. Katy Kandaris-Weiner is a licensed professional counselor, Andrea-approved EMDR consultant, and the founder and clinical director of Inner Balance Counseling in Arizona. Katy specializes in treating complex trauma, dissociative disorders, including DID, and early childhood attachment trauma. Her integrative clinical approach draws from EMDR, structural dissociation theory, and deep brain reorienting, and she brings over a decade of experience across community mental health, residential, and outpatient settings. In 2018, Katy founded Inner Balance Counseling. Her team includes 18 clinicians across 2 locations, all trained in EMDR and dissociation work. She also provides EMDR consultation, teaches on dissociation, and is currently developing her own EMDR manual and training pathway for early career clinicians. In this episode, you'll learn how to identify clinical indicators of dissociation and DID, differentiate normative dissociation from trauma-related dissociation, understand how early relational trauma disrupts identity development, and apply evidence-based tools to foster safety, stabilization, and integration. Whether you're in private practice, a group clinic, hospital, or community agency, this episode will help you better recognize and support clients who may be navigating the effects of deep, often invisible trauma. It will also invite you to offer care that is clinically sound, firming, and grounded in compassion. This episode is sponsored by Jane, all-in-one practice management software designed to make running your mental health practice smoother. Thank you, Jane, for supporting this work. Now let's get into it. Katy, thanks so much for being here today on the Affirming Minds podcast. I am so excited to have you and get into this topic. Could we start by you sharing a little bit about yourself with our audience and what drew you to specialize in working with complex trauma, dissociation, DID, all the things?
Of course, when I started my career quite a while ago, I didn't expect to end up with dissociation and with the things I did. So when I started my career in undergrad, I worked with New Song. It's a part of Hospice of the Valley now, and I worked with teens who had lost parents. And from there, I really loved it, and then went to grad school in Chicago, worked with the SMI population, decided I hated snow, really, as an Arizona-born and native. And I came back, and I ended up working at Community Bridges Detox, because at the time, it was a job, and I got it.
Yeah.
And from there, I continued to work in substance abuse and really loved it, to my surprise. And as I did that, I worked with a lot of youth, young adults, and they kept relapsing. It can be an incredibly hard field to work in because not everyone makes it. I found out about some of my clients passing was through coroner's requests. And then they would come back to treatment and back to treatment. And I would see the trauma. And I would do all of the things that I was taught to do, the CBT, the reframing, and it wasn't helping. And they kept relapsing. And so I took an EMDR training just to be like, okay, I need something. And at the end of that EMDR training, it was with Sarah Jenkins. She's a practitioner out of Arizona. She had an extra training on dissociation. And she and I laugh about this now because I was like, I don't know if DID is real. I'm not sure about this. And so I complete the training and we're in our consultation, and lo and behold, I go back to work, and one of the clients I'm working with, I try to start processing with, and she switches. And I have my first DID client, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And from there, I ended up treating that individual for 5 years. And at the end, they no longer met criteria for DID. But in that journey and afterwards, I really fell in love with working with dissociation. I got the people that they were like, my last 5 therapists don't know what to do with me. And I was like, great. Welcome. We've got stuff to do. So that's how I ended up that way.
I mean, I really appreciate you also naming what I think is something that we just have to address in this conversation, that there is a lot of skepticism, even within the field, about dissociative identity disorder, between like media representations of it. I think there's just a cynicism that has developed. And I think you kind of going through these different pathways of treatment, both with problematic substance use and dissociation, I just think it's just like a really fascinating part of the human experience, like all of the creative survival strategies that us humans do to sort of persevere when we've endured horrific traumatic events. And, I really appreciate that, you found purpose in treating people that maybe historically have not had a lot of safe spaces within even the therapeutic community of getting help and support. For listeners who may be newer to this topic, can you maybe just give us some operational definitions of how you see complex trauma and dissociation?
Sure. We have the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And a lot of that talks about a single event, like a car accident, or maybe repeated things, but we don't really have, at least in the US, a definition of that complex trauma.
Yeah.
We do have the dissociation. So I think that's also a really good segue, is that complex trauma refers to this repeated, prolonged relational trauma, especially in early life, abuse, neglect, or attachment disruptions. A lot of people really think about that abuse, that neglect, sexual assault, sexual violence. That also those big T things. But a lot of what I see ends up being that complex trauma and that leads us to dissociation is the attachment disruptions, the misattunements over and over. And sometimes it's just a mismatch between parents, and sometimes it's because they are in a lifestyle or path, if you would, that's not as healthy. And so then our brain's wonderful way of coping is to dissociate. And dissociation's way is the mind coping and overcoming by separating that emotional, the memory, sensation, identity with that event so that it doesn't belong to us or is me in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. How in the therapeutic space are you clocking dissociation as a symptom that might be a trauma response that someone is experiencing?
Yeah. So that actually can be really hard because people think it's really big.
Mm,
And sometimes, yes, absolutely. You can see the definite switches, the changes, but a lot of times it's like you feel like you're talking to someone who suddenly became younger, or I ask questions and they answer with a completely different thing. They try to redirect it, gaps in time, especially current time. One of the big factors between the dissociative disorder and DAD, one of the main things is a loss of current time. Not like I don't remember my childhood. It's like I don't remember last week.
right.
And the thing is, people aren't going to want to tell you about these. They're afraid you're going to think they're crazy or they can't help you. And that limits our ability, but then is something we then have to work with to keep track of these little things. So, losing time, even if it's just a couple of seconds, like, I don't know how I got to the end of the other part of my house, or asking them about, do you ever find journal entries or things you bought you don't remember? A really great tool that I use, it's really quick and easy, is the DES2 dissociative experience scale. And I've started picking out those kinds of questions of like, hey, how often do we've got the normal dissociation of like, I'm driving on the freeway and I miss my exit. As a mom, I don't times I've done that. That's, yes, technically that's dissociation, but it's not trauma related.
Yeah.
We're looking for that shifts or missing time. Another thing I look at is how many therapists have you been to and how many different diagnoses have you been given? I think the average is 10 for clients with DID before they get an accurate diagnosis.
Interesting.
For
Are
those cert-
there certain particular diagnoses you see on that journey, it being sort of misattributed to?
Borderline
Mm,
is a big one. And not that someone can't have dissociative identity disorder and borderline, but a lot of those attachment issues, that push pull, end up in there, or that attachment, like that very anxious or disorganized attachment, like tumultuous relationships, or a lot of disconnect throughout life.
mm,
Another one, oddly, is the exact opposite. Those very high achieving people that have such a separation between. I remember one client I treated, like when we were talking, they were like, yeah, I go to work, I go in my closet, I put on this suit, and then I go to the office and I'm this person. Now we could take that as a metaphor.
right.
They meant it as I am this person, and then I come home and I'm mom. And so we'll look for the metaphors that people do use, and it's normal to then say like, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about, that work part of you. Does it also know it's a mom? Because you can get like a lot of us use the metaphors, like your mom part, your that. But the more dissociation you get, the less those become integrated, the more they become separate as separate. It seems like separate beings, but it's not. It's a breakaway to try to protect the self from knowing something.
Right.
I hope that answered the question.
And that's helpful. So you're just seeing more severe using that assessment tool that you mentioned that can kind of pick some of this up, but also looking for how people are languaging these experiences, but then really exploring how
Yes.
concrete of this is experiences is
Right.
really leading to a fragmentation that is a trauma response versus
Yeah.
we have different parts of ourselves that show up in this space. It sounds like in these cases, it really feels siloed. It really feels like there's a disconnection
Yes.
for these different functional parts of oneself. How would you say that complex trauma, particularly that early relational trauma that you were mentioning, how does that impact a person's development of a sense of self?
So with relational trauma, my colleague Sarah Jenkins, who's a counselor, explained it to me like this, and I've never found a better way. Think of it as like your parents are the electric fence, and you have to attach to it. How do you attach to it? You have to wear a rubber glove. And those rubber gloves to attach, because a child can't realize that mom and dad are not able to provide, that are safe. That's too much to hold for a child. It just, because then what happens? If a kid truly realized that their parents were not capable of taking care of them, that would invoke such a deep terror, this fear, this like annihilation fear. We cannot have that. We have to put that somewhere.
Yeah.
And so it can't be about parents. It has to be about me.
Yeah.
And so with those rubber gloves of attaching, we have the child not, of course, consciously thinks that, okay, it's about me. It's also a developmental thing of the egocentrism.
Yeah.
Which is normal for that age. But what we don't want to do is, let's say a child is playing at home. This is a very simple example, but parent comes in and looks at everything and then starts yelling. It's not that the child's mess caused the yelling. They think so. It's that maybe parent A had a really bad day and came home and saw there's a mess and just exploded. It's not because there's a mess. If you have kids, there is always mess. It's that I had a bad day, I get yelled at my boss, and all these other factors. But kids don't understand it's always a causation. So there's always A causes B. So
Right.
dad walks in, sees that I'm not okay in some way. Therefore, I need to fix it. And the way I fix it is to do something different.
Mm.
But over time, that it's my fault, it's me, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, starts to really take root. Like this will happen to all parents, all people. Like you make a mistake. It's not the end of the world. And it's actually sometimes a really great thing because we have a tear and then we have a repair. Unfortunately, with this type of population, we get with attachment figures, tear, 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 no repair. And
Okay.
that continual tear without repair creates a self that has like a low ego strength. It is looking for how to make the inside safe by changing the outside world, which we know is not possible.
Right.
But the child thinks if I do this just right, mommy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, mama, whatever the caregiver situation is, it'll be okay in some way. And so that really chips away at the self and doesn't, I wouldn't say chips, it doesn't build a self. It
Right.
builds a self based on actions of others and that cognitive error that I can control that. And it's not meant to be in like oh, I'm going to control things. Oh my God, if I do that, it'll be okay. If I can just make this happen. And I'm sure people have heard that language in their clients.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that an incredible effort being put into trying to read, interpret, predict, and manage the emotional regulation of other people to keep oneself safe, I think is really, really becomes like people's whole lives become organized around that and all of their relational context. So I really appreciate you naming that explicitly. When that becomes the social relational conditioning, that building of one's own self-identity gets deprioritized and
Yeah.
doesn't always
It's
happen.
never learned. It's
Right.
never learned that I can make a mistake and it's okay. Or that mommy and daddy or grandma and grandpa or whoever makes a mistake and it's okay. What I see a lot is like this intolerance for negative and sometimes even positive affect. One thing you can do that's kind of odd, but it works really well. Ask your clients what happened. What was one good thing that happened this week? Like, tell me about the positives and see how long they can actually stay on that.
Yeah.
A lot of people can't because it's like, oh my God, something good happened, so something bad's going to happen. So we can't focus on that. seems really simple, but you can start tracking, like, is there that complex trauma? Is there more there than meets the eye? They come in presenting as, oh, anxiety, depression, but then if you don't have that curiosity to like dig just a little bit deeper to find out like what's really going on here, that's a good one I use. I'm like, if my client can stay on it for like one story and then has to switch to the negative, there's a great intolerance for that. And then at the same time, even though they switch to the negative, there's not a great tolerance for that either. What we call that window of tolerance, where it gets really small with the attachment wounds. And then there is no space for self.
Can you walk us through how dissociation winds up serving as this protective mechanism in the face of trauma? How does that sort of start to develop as the defense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because that's a great question. And that's how people are like, how did I get this way?
Right.
So we have two types of dissociation, if you want to think about it. By the way, everyone dissociates. It is a normal function. It does not mean something seriously wrong with you. We have the dissociation, which is just normal every day. I'm on the freeway. I get caught doing something. I totally forget. I space out. That's fine. We have the trauma related that is adaptive, where something really bad happens and you still have to go on. The best example I can use is myself. So I had a really difficult pregnancy due to an unknown autoimmune condition. And so my child's head was measuring in the less than 1 percentile. And so we had to do an amniocentesis and wait 2 weeks for genetic testing to see what was going on. In those 2 weeks, I can't promise you that I was very present. I know I dissociated. I went and saw my therapist and I was like, I know I'm dissociating. I should get out. And she's like, no, it's helping you function right now.
Right.
And so the problem is when it then continues. Mine really resolved when we found out, oh, no, he's just really small, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with him. And I was like, oh, the relief. And, I still had to process the whole event with my therapist and go through it, but then I wasn't dissociating.
Right.
It was like a coping skill to get somewhere, to get me through to the next moment, to keep living. However, when that is your life, when you're doing dissociating to just be okay in your environment, that over time really erodes and then creates this the more like what we think of as the parts of self doing jobs.
Yeah.
Like that dissociation for me helps me get through the day, to do work, to, read notes, sign them, do all the things, and then helped me get to that moment 2 weeks later where it was all right. It's when like, okay, that's one part. And then that part keeps having to do that over and over and then creates this whole web of different parts of self doing different jobs. The parts are always trying to protect the self. Dissociation is a protective mechanism. It's just that doesn't end if it's so long, it doesn't end when the trauma ends. Like you move out from your parents. This is ending. It's still there. That prolonged, what we talk about in that definition, that prolonged one. And the longer and longer it's there and the more fragmented or parts of self that have to consistently do that, the more we go down this continuum to that DID.
Yeah. And I work with a lot of survivors of sexual trauma, and I can see, and these are not people that meet criteria for dissociative identity disorder, but like sort of in that spot of trauma-related dissociation that is coming up in like specific contexts, like something like sexual intimacy. So now like it's decades after the sexual trauma was occurring, but still during sexual intimacy within consenting relationships, not being able to like be present in that experience without either going somewhere else, like mentally, like feeling like not in the body, not in the room, or feeling like they have to be somebody else to stay in that sexual experience, or even things like just general emotional intimacy, being hugged or connected by other people. I can't stay, right? I want to be able to have that experience, but it's like evading me. So I definitely can see recognizing when it's workable. Like, I feel like I dissociate when I do public speaking presentations, but it's like a totally
Yeah.
workable dissociation. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm
it's a protective mechanism so that I
right.
can put the emotion here so that I can do this. 'Cause the I get the same thing where it's like the overwhelming anxiety of like, oh my God, I have to talk to all these people. Has to
Right.
go somewhere. And
Right.
in that case, it's very adaptive.
Right.
Now, if your
Exactly.
whole job was doing that,
Yes.
we might have a problem. But that's a great example of how it's adaptive.
Exactly. Like, I have to be like, what did I say? I have no idea. I think that's a really important distinction. One, I think probably reduce the shame of why it exists is understanding it undoubtedly served you at some point, and that the experience of dissociation is an innately human experience, but just
Absolutely.
recognizing when it's workable and when it's not workable is going to be like probably an important piece to decipher.
Is it adaptive? And sometimes the other important factor is that the person is still in the situation.
Mhm.
And we have to be very careful about dismantling something that might pull the rug out.
Yeah. Yep.
Like if someone is still in the DV experience, yes, we want to help them get out of it. Because when we pull away, if you will, the dissociation, we get realization.
Mm,
And, what is that going to mean for the person?
yeah. Yeah.
And is that a really adaptive thing to do to them right now?
Yeah.
Because that can throw the whole system, that can increase symptoms if they realize something that they're not ready to realize.
Yeah. Yeah. And then going back to like how you got on this path, I can see, dissociation, we're obviously talking about a process that happens without the ingestion or influence of external substances to create that numbness,
Mhm.
disconnection,
Absolutely.
dissociation. And I think understanding problematic substance use, like through the lens that probably a lot of people are trying to willfully disconnect from certain emotions, memories, urges, body sensations.
And they're really trying to get out. They're
Right.
trying to escape something. And I've known a lot of people where it's the substances came after, like they may have started as something fun sometimes, but they've
Right.
also started as like the dissociation isn't enough, but I
Yeah.
found this and it works.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. To your point, sometimes pulling away, and we just sort of look at it like a hammer and a nail, substance use bad. We need to pull this away, and we don't give them scaffolding to support what
Oh my
they've
God,
been
yes.
trying to deal with the substance use that sometimes we leave people not just vulnerable to relapse, but vulnerable to probably all sorts of like emotional and mental health crises as we start to like pull away what they have been, trying to use to protect themselves, even though we know that they have like all these other health consequences and safety consequences.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Like you were saying, we have to scaffold something. If there isn't, because that was one thing I noticed with substance abuse. We would, detox them and we're like, yay. And I thought that, that is a good thing. And then, but we've now ripped off everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we could go into a whole conversation about managed care and whatnot, but leaving that aside when we have 2 weeks then. And we're like, okay, let's teach you as many coping skills as possible and then send you out, but not realize that we need to be very mindful about what skills are we doing? What information are we giving?
Yeah.
Like when I was working in inpatient, I feel like we try to front load them so much with information that it was overwhelming the system and a lot of it didn't go in. And then, looking back, I can see why my clients relapsed. They had 3 weeks of treatment and then we let them right back out. We try to set them up with sober living and supports. And I think as counselors, we do the best we can with the resources we have.
Yeah.
I think the lack overall of that understanding of dissociation and what's truly adaptive and maladaptive in that situation. Like I'm a DBT girl at heart. And so I like to go back to that is, yeah, the substance use sometimes is really adaptive in that moment. Is it adaptive any longer? Not really. Can we replace it? So like that substitute, if you want to think of more of CBT, like that substitute action. But dissociation is very complicated to dismantle, you know?
And now a quick word about our amazing sponsor, Jane.
Can we agree on something? Therapists are already doing enough. You're managing care, notes, scheduling, billing, all while holding space for everyone else. The last thing you need is a system that makes it harder. That's why I switched to Jane.
It's intuitive, it's beautifully designed, and it just works. It saves me time and protects my energy. The customer support alone is worth it, but the smoother workflow, that's what made it a long-term solution for me. Use code AFFIRM1MO to get a 1-month grace period. Switch to Jane and see what it feels like to be supported by your EHR for once. Time to decide if Jane's a better fit.
Big thanks to Jane for supporting this podcast. And now back to the interview. So I think you've really walked through this non-pathologizing dissociation that's just like part of being a human being and, part of an experience. When there is clinically significant dissociation, how are you starting to think about it of like, okay, this actually falls under this umbrella of a dissociative disorder, maybe versus being part of a PTSD presentation or borderline personality disorder with some transient dissociation? The dissociative piece is a central component of what this person is struggling with.
Yeah. Dissociation is a continuum. So we've got primary dissociation, which is you're like, I had a car accident. I don't know time. It's just, is that over? And then we transition to that secondary or dissociation, which we start seeing more of the dysfunction and it really affecting how their life is going. Like that they're starting to get to the point where it's not working.
Yeah.
That's when we really start to look at it as problematic. I think for our clients, we have to make sure they understand like that secondary dissociation. And then we get the tertiary or the third layer where you get DID. And DID actually, to be honest, is a lot easier to identify than the middle. The middle is very murky and mushy. And so with DID, the big thing you're looking for is the current time loss, even in small amounts. But then we go back to that secondary, and that's where you have to start asking some weird questions, if you will, of like people, because my clients will be like, oh, I know I don't have little people in my head. I know that's me, but it doesn't feel like me. And those are the things where it starts becoming problematic.
Yeah.
Like, I know I experienced that logically, and there's a part of me that doesn't believe that, but I don't think that makes any sense, but that's how I feel. But I talk about knowing up in your head and knowing in your heart. Is that you? Did you experience that? And the answer a lot of times is, I know I did, but it doesn't feel like it. Problems start happening in our life with relationships, with work, with organizing, just being able to cope because part of us is not in the present to do it. It's very hard to be in a relationship if you are physically in the present and so is your partner, but you are not all the way there. You're reacting to something that's not present. That's when it starts like really becoming a bigger issue.
I know you said DID are like there's actually more clarity because of this present time dissociation lost time that's happening. For some of the other sort of existing diagnostic criteria that center dissociation, like depersonalization, how do you distinguish from those other conditions? Are there any specific hallmarks you're looking for?
So first, the depersonalization is this idea that things don't belong to me. I call it depersonalization is not me, derealization, not mine. And so for the depersonalization, you got this like feelings of disconnect from the body, the thoughts, the experiences or identity. And then you've got derealization, again, not mine. Like the world feels foggy, unreal. I have people say they're looking out through a window or fog. And so for those other diagnoses, you're going to have maybe one or two of those as the primary thing that's going on. There won't be any time loss. And so it's almost as a process of elimination of going, okay, well, this is going on, but this is not.
I see.
Okay. You look at the other diagnosis like the amnesia. Are you losing any current time? Has that ever happened where you found something you don't remember doing or buying? And this is again where I like the DES because it's free. It's 0% to 100% of the time. And you just add them up. But after using it so many times, I know some of the questions by heart. Like, has anyone ever told you you're lying when you don't think you have?
Interesting.
And then differentiating between like, oh, I don't know how many times I've closed the garage and been like, did I close the garage? I don't know. But does that happen with other things all the time? Like you think you've done it, but then you don't remember you did. And so using some of those questions to really hone in on what's going on, I would say a lot of the time I end up not using those diagnoses. I end up using OSDD, otherwise specified dissociative disorder, because it's kind of like, well, they meet these things, but they don't quite meet DID. The best diagnosis would be complex trauma, which we don't have.
Right.
So you kind of like in that middle ground, see what fits the best, knowing from the theory I work for, structural dissociation theory, it doesn't matter where on the continuum there are, you still do the same thing, you just do it, in differing degrees. One thing with dissociation, you will feel like a broken record. When you have to repeat things over and over, and you go over the same things with your clients because the whole system doesn't learn at the same time.
Interesting. No, that makes sense. What are some of the common myths or misconceptions about DID that you wish more clinicians understood?
I think the biggest thing is it's not going to look like the movies. I've been doing dissociation and trauma work like with EMDR and structural dissociation theory since 2017. In that time, I've had one client that was slightly like that, where she really, like her voice changed. Yes, technically it can. Someone shows up in different clothes and whatnot. So I wish people would realize that it can be subtle shifts, that switching parts can be that, and that it can be like a person's posture. I had one client that their eyes would narrow and they would become very cynical. And that it is not multiple personality. That's the big one.
Yeah.
We changed that definition. Oh, I don't know how many, in the 90s, I think. It is not multiple personalities. It is fragmented parts of oneself trying to function. And that it's not attention seeking. The attention seeking and that's what gets me. It's like, this is not attention seeking. No one goes and is like, today's a great day to blow up my life. Let's do it.
Right.
And relapse on heroin or destroy their marriage. Like, no one does that.
Yeah.
It's not attention seeking. It's trying to get a need met. It's trying to figure out how to get somewhere. And so I wish people would just set that aside and be like, how is this serving the client? How is this helpful? Even if it seems bonkers that it could be helpful, it is helping the system in some way. And I wish people would realize that, and that it's not this attempt to manipulate or attention seeking. Do people do that? Yes. In the sense that, no. My clients are never trying to get one up on me. They're usually terrified and have no idea what's going on and really want clarity about it.
Yeah,
I think that would be my biggest thing.
I think that's really an important component to debunk. Could you share a few evidence-based strategies or therapeutic approaches that help foster a sense of safety for highly dissociative clients?
Yes, absolutely. So I use the theory, structural dissociation theory, and it's a parts theory that helps all parts become on the same page. One of my clients and I came up with this metaphor. It's like the idea of having a group project, but everyone is doing their own thing. At the end, it's having everyone doing the same thing, working on the group project. So I do use structural dissociation theory. I do not believe it's technically evidence-based, but it's used a lot. But before we even get there, because that's another thing, don't go to your client if you think they're dissociated and go tell me about all your parts. That's a great way to blow someone out of their window of tolerance. We start with skills. So for a long time, I still do this today, I do DBT skills. We need to know how to regulate our distress and our emotions and be more present in this moment. And how do we even act with other people?
Yeah.
And so those are great skills. Another curriculum that just came out, which I'm super excited about, is called Finding Solid Ground. It is the first evidence-based treatment for dissociation. It's a 12-week psychoeducational program for dissociation. And it has been shown to greatly reduce dissociation and PTSD symptoms, self-harming, things like that. And so that you can get it on Amazon. It's a workbook and then a therapist guide. And so that's one I have started really recommending because it goes through the skills people need, but in a way that's not going to like be, bring up all your traumas. It's very focused on the coping in the present day because we have to stabilize daily living before we can do processing.
Yeah.
That has to be stable. So DBT, finding solid ground, after those, EMDR, somatic work can be used, but the big thing is like, you're going to spend a lot of time in stabilization. Get really familiar with your skill-based stuff. It's not a failure. It's actually incredibly good clinical work. And so those two, I really love DBT, finding solid ground, especially.
Yeah.
So
So you're
those would be my
seeing like really
go-tos.
powerful outcomes from it. Yeah.
Yeah, really powerful. Even if you don't have dissociation training, doing DBT skills, doing the finding solid ground workbook, those will help. And then after that, getting the consultation you need to like further that. But those two evidence-based processes are great.
Yeah. I'm really glad you named that too, because I think that a lot of the people that are doing this work who are going to interact with someone who has experienced complex trauma and maybe meet criteria for DID or just maybe have dissociation that has become clinically significant, be part of like something that's become unworkable in their lives in some way that is adding to their struggle. Like you said, oftentimes people will find you after a lot of experiences and therapy that haven't worked. And then, which is great, their perseverance to keep on trying.
Yeah.
Right. And not everybody is going to do that.
No, and that's the sad part. It's all the people we lose in between.
Right. A lot of the people that are going to be maybe going through community mental health clinics, they might be getting a referral from their primary care doctor. They're going to a group practice. So I think sometimes in these training environments, we talk about this like ideal optimized world where everybody gets paired with a specialist. And that would be lovely. And that's also just like oftentimes not reality. So I think would being able to say that if you find even if your work or your passion is not in complex trauma or doing dissociative work, that trauma is so pervasive that the idea that you will somehow get through your clinical career without encountering someone who has endured complex trauma and has some dissociative presentation is probably incredibly low. So knowing that everybody, I think, with like some level of proficiency can start doing DBT skills work with clients. It sounds like this other training that you mentioned is also something that is incredibly accessible.
Yes,
so
it's incredibly accessible. It's not expensive. Like I think it's like $30 online to get a workbook.
Yeah.
And so it's very accessible. If you walk away with anything from this, is that a dissociation is probably not as scary as you think.
Yeah.
Read about the DES too. It's not a long thing. The questions are wordy, but they can be you could 5-10 minutes with your client, but then start getting some more information that you wouldn't have gathered. And then, not only getting consultation, but like then try the basic skills. Then start teaching the DBT skills, start teaching using finding solid ground, which are they are some of like the DBT skills and the time orientation and grounding. Rank it. You can do this.
Yeah.
Don't just send the person away.
Yeah.
Or feel like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important piece that you're kind of doing it, just like the skills work that is going to support folks with like the safety and stabilization that is required to really support their healing and their functioning and potentially get to that next step of trauma processing. And we know with like sort of what, at least in the field at this time, is considered these gold standard treatments for trauma. We're thinking about EMDR, but also prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy, all of which the common thread between them is they do a trauma processing component that is central to the treatment. So for you, like, how do you assess readiness? What is like that communication and collaboration around readiness look like when you're kind of
Absolutely.
thinking about getting to the
No, and
that
that's a great
component?
question because people are like, when do I do it? When do I start? And I know of the other models, but my primary one is EMDR. I'm an EMDR freak. I love EMDR. I'm writing my own manual currently. Maybe it'll be done someday. But from structural dissociation theory, Kathy Steele is one of the authors of it. And from her and the books, you can kind of gather that, can the client stay in their window of tolerance? Are all parts communicating or at least not sabotaging? Do all parts know we're going to process? Do all parts agree that they're either going to participate or stay out of it? Is there like internal consent from the entire system of this is what we're doing? Do they know how to ground? Do they know how to say it's too much? To pause? Because that's another thing. People will start EMDR processing, but the client really has no way to say no. They don't have the awareness or the ability because saying no is a whole thing with attachment trauma.
Wow. Yeah. That's really, really interesting.
Because if you're in an environment where you standing up for yourself is going to get you in trouble or hurt, you're not going to know how to do it. So they need to know how to do that, to speak up their needs and pause the processing if necessary. And they need to know how to consistently regulate their emotions. Those are kind of what I'm looking for. Again, that's that daily functioning. That's
Yeah.
gotten better. Do we have a wide enough window of tolerance that when we start bringing up all these negative feelings and bad memories, you're able to stay in it?
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
it's itty bitty, then you're just going to come out of your window and start it either, the hypo or the hyper arousal is just the reliving. So you need to make sure, can I stay in my window? Can I tell you when it's not enough? Do my system agree that this is what we're going to do? Do I know how to use my skills, both emotion regulation, the grounding, and do I know how to tell you when, hey, we need to stop, this is too much?
Yeah. I think we really take that part for granted sometimes as clinicians. And, I could imagine it just being such an important piece to think about when someone is struggling with dissociation, particularly if it's like presenting more as, in this DID where there isn't this integration where that the whole system's on board. But I do
Yeah.
think recognizing that broader understanding of our responses to include the fawn response and the flop response and the freeze response, and that some people default to that so intensely that saying no, setting boundaries, asserting preferences, particularly in moments of high distress,
Yes.
just not assuming that can be accessible to everybody at all times. And I think just, prefacing that with the therapeutic space, how do you start to use invitational language in all of the things that we do and offer so that there's constant checkpoints. We're not relying on someone who may not have access to that yet to be telling us what they need and verbalizing it and spontaneously bringing it up. What has been injured in this person's ability to consent because of their
Yes.
trauma experiences?
Yeah. Do they even have awareness that they don't want to consent?
Absolutely.
Or do, like you were talking about your clients earlier, who there is this incredible pushback?
Yeah.
Like we have to look at both ends, but is the system really ready to know what you're going to get to?
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you see as some of the common challenges that clinicians face when working with DID, and how can clinicians navigate some of those challenges in an effective way, in a compassionate way?
Yeah. I think one of the big ones is not knowing what it is. Not knowing what they're not like. If you don't know it, you don't look for it.
Yeah.
So getting just familiar with like, what would that look like? What does that look like in clients? The other big one is pushing for the trauma narrative. That's a big challenge that a lot of clinicians face because they're told to get the story. They want, in the intake, you need to know everything. If I can know the whole story, then I can know what coping skills to give you. That's a big one. And that can really make things worse for the client because we're going into reliving.
Yeah.
And then there's I don't want to make it worse. fear, like, oh, I don't want to do anything because it's going to make it worse. Yes, well, we can make it worse, but we can also help. And so not doing anything is not helpful either. And then a big thing I see is people doing, sometimes they do a little bit of a training and then start using it and don't know the full thing. So like with DID and all of these other words, we're looking to incorporate the whole thing, not start neat. The people you're looking at are not the ego state people where you could go, oh, that's your mom part. What is your mom part thing? That's just playing into the cognitive error of like, that is separate. So like that mom part of you. So learning some of the language, that's another really big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So what role would you say psychoeducation plays in empowering clients who experience dissociation or have DID? It sounds like you are really intentional about how languaging certain things can either assist in the process or potentially further this fragmentation.
It can. I think psychoeducation is a really great tool. I love psychoeducation. Talking about what trauma is can be a great, like, in way to clients. These are some of the things that sometimes happen to people. We don't have to name it as you, but like that experience this, that you're not alone in it, that you're not broken. We do these things to to adapt, to survive. Your brain was doing a really clever thing to help you get through this. So not only it's like we empower them to have the knowledge, because I get a lot of like, I'm afraid I'm crazy. Oh, you're not crazy. You did a wonderful job at surviving. And so really increasing that, not only the understanding of what's going on in their life, but the internal compassion of like, hey, whoa, let's not just reframe it, but let's stop and go, whoa, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so that psychoeducation can be really helpful. And you don't have to know all the language. Most of us can pause and be like, hey, let's think about that. Is that true? Is it actually you're quote unquote broken? And I don't know what a broken person actually looks like. And for me, I use a lot of humor. I'm like, what is broken? Because I don't see your arm falling off. And that's my route of humor. Not everyone needs to have that. But, I think the big thing is that helping clients understand their experience, that they're not alone in that experience, and that it was their body's way or their mind's way of really taking care. Yeah. And then, because I think we have a lot of social media right now about some of it good, some of it bad, and it's not all accurate. So we have to be the people who say like, hold on, what do you know about trauma? Let's not make any assumptions. Tell me what you know. Tell me what you know about this. Okay, let me tell you what it actually is. Yeah. And so that psychoeducation can be really empowering to just know and know, I know it sounds silly, but like remind people like, you're not going to get the best information from Google, from TikTok. Great. Love TikTok. Fun to watch. And it's not something we need to get all our information.
I've seen clients have different relationships to like what they're consuming on social media. Some of it feeling incredibly validating, some of it feeling very stigmatizing. So I think just being able to garnish that curiosity of what did you hear? How did it resonate with you? What was interesting to you about it? What did it bring up for you? What has been created in that vacuum is also a reflection of like the mental health desert that has existed for so many people in their homes, their cultures, their communities, their just healthcare access. When it gets filled like to your point, like with some really great resource and some stuff that is like a little bit more, like on that. I don't want to like diminish it, but like maybe more entertainment, more based on like someone's like lived experience, their opinion. Yeah. So I do think, though, I see it as like an entry into saying what is like the world reflecting back to you about what your experience is, like what is it that you're holding on to, and what is the meaning you're making of it, and how do we leverage that for
I think I really love that social media has these lived experiences. Yeah, those are great, and don't try to fit your lived experience into someone else's.
Right. Yep.
Another thing therapists can do is having a list of sites or books saying like, great, and here are some other resources if you'd like to look up some stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that a big piece of the psychoeducation you have to do is debunking and like working against some of these like media presentations of DID specifically? Just because I think the nature of the condition there has been like a little bit of a caricature made of either whether they
Yeah.
be like in the best, most generous interpretation, maybe taking the most severe cases or, and like sort of doing some media presentations or just like an artistic caricature of what is like thought to be,
Yeah.
this condition.
Yeah, that does happen a lot. And I think that can help, and then that can create so much shame. And so it is finding that balance. It has been somewhat made into a caricature. Now, don't get me wrong, I find it a fascinating condition, and I'm a big Marvel fanatic. So like Night Moon, cool, really cool. Not a good example of DID. Not an actual example.
That's where I
Like,
think
do I wish I had another self that felt cried? Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
don't.
it's right.
And making sure, like, hey, I think to also not like then stigmatize the watching of it, going, yeah, that's really cool. And this is what we can take from it that is the criteria.
Right.
And then this is your lived experience, and that not everything fits into one neat box. And so trying to take it and be like, that good DBT and how about this and where does it intersect? And, it's okay. It is, but to remember, it's so much more complex than a caricature.
Yeah. I do think also the media portrayals have very much, this may not be true of like all of them, but I think one of the common threads of them is, yes, one of these very intense representations of altered states that have big, loud personality distinction that like can be like gender difference, language and accent and developmental age and all of these things that people are sort of looking for, but also almost like assuming like the trauma is oftentimes sexual in nature and happened in early childhood. I think that kind of idea almost in a singular way linked to childhood sexual abuse, oftentimes by a family member. I think a lot of
Yeah.
messaging that happens.
Yes, that is. And yes, it can be. Yes, I have read cases that it is the huge, big, yes, people can change accents and have actually different prescriptions and vision. And the likelihood of you seeing that is not very large. It is, I think DID is more than they report because it's a lot smaller and it shifts.
Yeah.
And to remember that producers on shows want to sell shows. They don't want to sell reality.
Yeah.
Even reality TV does not sell reality.
Right. And I think this is true of anything. Like The Beautiful Mind, such an amazing movie. I worked with many, many people over the year with psychosis. Most of them, they're not hallucinating full visual human beings with like backstories that they see as like, perfect visual representations that they, are their roommates in college, right? Like it's usually things like hearing voices or just organized thought that is like a lot more a subtle and maybe less captivating experience of psychosis. And yet like that is probably the more commonplace experience you're going to have with someone versus these artistically defined experiences. And it's something just to debunk.
Yeah. And going off that was like the perfect example because John Nash actually had auditory hallucinations, but you can't show a movie with auditory hallucinations. So they made them visual.
Right. Exactly. And it translated better to screen.
To screen, but that's their exact point of like, it's not the same. And I'm sure you could get something from it. And as a therapist, being open to that, not being like, oh, it's social media, don't listen, or it's a movie or this. Be open to whatever, walks in your door.
Yeah, absolutely. No, very true. Well, it was so amazing to have you. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can find more about the important work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is innerbalanceaz.com. I have a group practice in Mesa and Tempe, Arizona. A lot of our website has a ton of psychoeducational articles. That's how we like to help and provide that psychoeducation in that good place. So that's where you can find me. That's where you can find our newest programs, consultation, anything like that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining our community on the Affirming Minds podcast. If you loved this episode as much as we did, please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts and share it on your socials. If you want more information about how this podcast can add to your continuing education credits, visit affirmmentalhealth.com. And remember, let's affirm, heal, and grow together.